in your organizations. I am extremely pleased to have so many of you joining us today, including a few chapter presidents, as well as some of our members of the SMPS National Board of Directors. The one thing that I want to stress to you, and we'll reiterate it throughout the session here today, is that the SMPS headquarters staff and board of directors is invested in not only your chapter success, but to your individual success in a position on your board. It is now my pleasure to introduce your current SMPS Treasurer Secretary, Chris Rickman. Chris is going to help navigate some of the topics here today, including one that he is particularly passionate about. Chris?
Thank you, Antonio, and thank you everybody for being on the call. It shows the good support that all the chapters and SMPS is getting from your volunteer efforts. And so just a little bit about the Treasurer's Toolkit that Antonio, like Antonio said, it's something I'm really passionate about. A couple of years ago, Doug Parker came and asked me if I would co-chair a task force to help put this toolkit together to assist chapter treasurers, because we knew it was something that was lacking, the support that treasurers get, and something that, a lot of times treasurers are thrown into this position and they have no idea, anything about finances or what goes on. So Sharon O'Field and myself were the co-chairs, along with Amber Burke, Kathleen Held, and Bart Pugh serving as members of the task force. And, we wanted to put something together that would help all the treasurers, whether it be chapter treasurers or regional conference treasurers, be successful in the volunteer position that they're put into. A lot of folks that are thrown into this position, like I said, have no experience in the finance side of things, and so we wanted to create something that was easy to understand and had lots of useful information, and also be a single source for all the treasurers to get their information. So we, prior to putting this toolkit together, there was information out there, but it was all, spread out into many documents and put in various different places. So the toolkit was put together to make sure all this information was in one place to help the treasurers as a single source to go to. And so as you can see, on the screen, it was, some basic accounting terms that we put in there. We'll talk about the standard chart of accounts later, as well as some financial statements, but there's also information in there about being PCI compliant when you take credit cards and such, and some information about uses and signatures on credit and debit cards. Antonio is going to talk about the chapter financial reporting obligations as well as IRS reporting, and then there's good ideas in there about going through an audit process that we believe every chapter should be going through if you're not going through right now, and then a little bit of information on some various different registration providers. And obviously, this isn't going to cover everything and every question that you may have, but hopefully it's going to answer a lot of questions that new treasurers have coming in, as well as treasurers that have been in for quite some time. So, Antonio?
Thank you, sir, very much. And we'll hear, as I said, we'll hear from Chris along the way later on. Keep it moving here. As a member of any board, each person has fiduciary responsibility across a wide-ranging spectrum. That means you are a steward of your organization. For the purposes of this discussion today, I've broken that finance role down into 3 tiers of responsibility. They are compliance, financial reporting, and custodianship. Because of the very nature of the calendar and what we're up against over the next few weeks, we start with compliance. To comply generally means that you're required to do something or there are consequences. To that end, it's tax time, ladies and gentlemen. Our friends at the IRS are eager to hear from us. Nonprofit organizations like ours are required to file an IRS 990 annually, which form you are, as a chapter, are required to file depends on the size of your chapter as it relates to annual revenue. If you are a chapter with gross receipts up to $50,000, you file the IRS Form 990, which is a postcard. If your cash receipts are over $50,000 but less than $200,000, then you file the 990EZ. 95% of you guys fall under one of these two categories. And for those of you who are have cash receipts over $200,000, you file what we call the long form or the standard IRS Form 990. The 990 is an informational return, which means there is no income tax associated with filing. There are exceptions. One fairly uncommon one is when income is derived from what the IRS considers outside of our exempt purpose. Again, this is very uncommon. Examples are receiving rental income from the ownership of a building, or more common in chapters is actually having advertising revenue. Because these are fairly uncommon, excuse me as the fire truck passes by, because these are fairly uncommon items, I won't focus on them heavily, just to say that there are instances when nonprofits can have for-profit income and there's income tax consequences related to those. But the most common instance where there's tax or penalty consequences is when you miss your filing deadline. So the filing deadline for your 990 for this fiscal year, which ended August 31st, 2015, is January 15th, 2016. To avoid penalty for non-filing of that 990, whichever version you file, you may file a Form 8868 for an automatic 3-month extension, provided that you file the extension form by the deadline date. So today is January 6th, 2016, which means you have 9 days to get the 990 filed and in the hands of the IRS or file an extension. We're going to highlight many resources that we provide for you guys, and each of these resources are or will be housed in the My SMPS community under the Treasurer's community. These particular guides for 990N and 990EZ we update on an annual basis, and they are step-by-step guidelines for filing your particular forms. Again, they are accessible to you either via My SMPS or you can request them directly from us. Okay, Form 1099s. Organizations that use consultants or contractors that are individual taxpayers, i.e. not companies, in excess of $600 during the calendar year, that means January through December, must provide that consultant or contractor with the Form 1099. To determine the tax status of a vendor, you may request that they provide you with an IRS Form W-9, which just determines whether they're an individual and if, in fact, they should receive a 1099 from you at the end of the year. The easiest way to get a Form W-9 from a vendor is to require it as part of the payment process, meaning you don't pay any vendor from your accounts payable unless you have a W-9 on file for that particular vendor. It's a fairly standard practice, and if you guys use consultants on a regular basis, one I would urge you to employ. This is what a standard Form 1099 looks like. Generally, you will fill out everything on the left side from the payer's name, which would be the chapter name and address, the payer's federal tax ID number, the recipient's federal tax ID number or social security number, the recipient's name and address, down to city and town. Most of the other boxes in the 1099 don't apply to us. Generally, what you'll fill out is the line 7, which is non-employee compensation, which is the total amount above $600 that you would pay the individual. So the deadline for filing 1099s with your vendors, giving them a copy because they need them to file their taxes, is January 31st, 2016. That gives you guys 25 days to get that done. As part of the process, you'll see this particular copy says copy A for Internal Revenue Service Center. Each copy of the 1099 that you provide to a vendor must also go in a package, one package for each year to the IRS of all the 1099s you provide to the IRS. And that deadline is February 28th, 2016. I encourage you, because you have the deadline of January 31st, to just do it all at one time so you don't have that February deadline to concern yourselves with. Just get it all done by January 31st. If you guys have any questions about the 990 or the 1099, again, all of this information is housed on my SMPS, but anything related to the IRS can also be found on irs.gov website.
And Antonio, just to be clear, you don't have to report if you're reimbursing your vendor for travel expenses. It's only for the services they provide, correct?
That is accurate and a very good point. I've actually had a couple of treasurers reach out to me because they're already in the process of filing their 1099 to ask that very question. So yes, it's true. Reimbursed expenses are not considered consulting fees. They're just that reimbursements, and they do not qualify as payments under the Form 1099.
Right.
Okay, so we covered the first two things on this particular slide. We have IRS Form 990 and Annual Form 1099. The other one is State Corporation Reports. We are actually, I don't know how many of you know this, but we are actually, SMPS headquarters is incorporated in Missouri, while we're physically in Alexandria, Virginia. That means that we have filing requirements in each of those jurisdictions. At the end of the year, we have to file a report for Alexandria that gives us, basically, as a non-domestic corporation, the authority to do business in Virginia. And we also have to file to maintain our state corporate status with Missouri. I would urge you guys as treasurers to check your previous chapter records and also check with your state and local authorities to see if you're required to file such a report. It varies by state. If you need help locating the proper authority to reach out to, again, you can always use us as a resource. We're happy to do so. All right, so we're to the second tier of financial reporting, which is, the second tier of responsibility, which is financial reporting. Sorry about that. And I'm going to have Chris talk to you about a couple of other areas that we focused on in the toolkit. We don't have uniformity across chapters because no two chapters are created equally, but it would be great if we had a certain level of standardization across chapters, because then we could help each other to be more efficient, more effective in our financial reporting. Chris?
Yeah, so, the task force, with the help of Antonio, developed the standard chart of accounts, and that's listed in the toolkit. So, hopefully all chapters, like Antonio said, would report their income and expenses in a uniform fashion. We know it's not a one-size-fits-all, but the chart of accounts should be a good starting point, and you should only have to make a few additions as needed as you go through the chart of accounts that we've set up. And every chapter is not going to use every account that's there, so there may be accounts that we have listed that don't apply. But if all chapters started with the chart of accounts that we've developed, it will help Antonio in his review of the books. It'll help your chapter reporting process, and it'll also help you in the audit process that we're going to talk about later as well. And so, what you're seeing here is a spreadsheet that we developed as part of the toolkit to help chapters that maybe all chapters may not have the ability to use QuickBooks to do their books. And so what we've developed here is a standard spreadsheet that we hope those chapters that don't have QuickBooks would use. And it's got a list, and it's set up with all the chart of accounts that we've come up with. And it was developed so you can put in a budget for the year, and then it's also helpful as you go through each month to put in your revenue and expenses. And it's got what you're looking at here is a sample profit and loss or sample income statement. And Antonio is going to populate a few cells, and you can see that it's going to auto roll up, and that it's also going to automatically roll into the year-to-date spreadsheet. So he's putting in some money for typical programs or client panels and the such, and then maybe some education events, and then as well we'll put in some expenses. And again, these categories can be renamed to fit the needs of your chapter, but the intent is to have the main categories as far as the chart of accounts kind of stay in place. And if your chapter is using QuickBooks, you should have an easy look at how to get to the profit and loss statement and the balance sheet for your chapter. And so there's tabs set up for each month of the fiscal year for the chapter, and then we have the year-to-date tab that rolls everything up and should really help you provide your chapter reporting to the board in an easy fashion. And then the balance sheet will obviously populate from day one, and then you update that every month. So for those chapters that aren't using QuickBooks, I really encourage you to download this spreadsheet and use it for your chapter's financial reporting.
Thank you, Chris.
Huh?
Sorry, I was just playing around with the rest.
That's okay.
Had a loss initially. I wanted to make that loss look a little better. So the number is so big that we can't see it right now. So financial reporting is extremely important. I said there are 3 tiers of responsibility as it relates to treasurers: financial reporting, compliance, and custodianship. And depending on the time of month or year, one can be more important than the other. But financial reporting is absolutely essential, an essential part of any organization. But for chapters, and as chapter leaders, as chapter treasurers, and the other members of the board, you always are fiduciaries, and you always have financial stewardship responsibility for your members. So I urge you guys to, if you are using spreadsheets, this is a very good one to Chris has supplied. We urge you to use it if you're not using anything like it. We also have a sample QuickBooks chapter, which I'm going to show you now, just very briefly. And if you, this is actually an SMPS sponsored sample chapter, which will allow you guys to use QuickBooks just to get a feel for it and play around with it. Take a minute to log in here. Okay, so this is just a sample chapter training module of QuickBooks, and it's available to anybody. All you have to do is contact us at headquarters to get the login credentials. Getting started with QuickBooks, there's a welcome guide. You just click that. It'll walk you through all the particular areas of QuickBooks. You can actually go back to QuickBooks, and there are sample vendors and sample donors here. You can create a bill. You can actually go through the process of paying the bill. Very handy tool that we encourage you guys to use. If you're thinking about going to software, there are many different software packages out there. QuickBooks is just one. We happen to use QuickBooks, the desktop version, at national headquarters. I like it. It's very easy to use, especially for, I know you guys, some of you do finance every day, all day, but some of you do not. QuickBooks is very easy to use for non-finance people, I would say. Thank you again, Chris.
Yeah, I would agree with that, Antonio. We would, like I say, in a perfect world, all chapters would be using QuickBooks or some software that's very similar, but QuickBooks is very easy. It's very inexpensive for the chapters to use. So I would encourage all chapters to at least take a look at it if you're not in QuickBooks right now. And maybe you can find some benefit, because it helps with the transition as well, because the history is in the system and you don't have to worry about trying to recreate that history every time you change the treasurer. So I would encourage all chapters to at least take a look at QuickBooks and see if it makes some sense for them.
Yep. So we talk about financial reporting. It's very process driven in many instances, and I've listed some of the processes that are standard across organizations and therefore across chapters. There's budget formulation, there's accounts payable, there's accounts receivable, there's bank reconciliations, and there should be an annual review or an audit each year as well. These processes are common to organizations, and as treasurers, you are primarily responsible for each one of these items. Occasionally, in financial reporting, we are product driven, and a budget is a product, as are board reports, as is the annual review or audit, which is not something that we produce, but we are responsible for guiding to conclusion and ultimately provides a report, which is a product which details the health of our organization. Our final tier of responsibility is custodianship. Each member of your chapter board is a financial steward of the organization. As the resident expert on finance, it's incumbent upon you as treasurers to ensure that you have sound written policies in place. These policies can range from debit credit cards to expense approval, check authorization and signing, segregation of duties, internal controls. Written policies are great to have in place, but if you're not walking the walk, if you're not following those policies, then they're essentially worthless. As treasurer, you're responsible, along with the rest of the leadership, meaning each member of the board, is responsible to ensure that all policies are good policies, number one, and number two, and most importantly, that all of those policies are being followed. A budget should be a formalized annual financial policy. I believe that most of the chapters, based on the financial reports that you submit on an annual basis, do have some form of budget. But how many of you, I wonder, would consider what you produce on an annual basis a true annualized financial policy? This is one of the things that I hope to survey each treasurer about, just to find out what the answer is. In the interim, I encourage you all to be thoughtful about producing timely and meaningful budgets that you strive to adhere to. You are absolutely a custodian of your chapter's financial assets. As such, a policy that ensures a treasurer with physical access to funds is not also the person who reconciles your accounts. And this is a standard segregation of duties issue. If the treasurer is the one who reconciles the account, then he or she probably shouldn't have access to your cash. And if the president is the person who does such, then they shouldn't have access to the cash. Reconciling is an extremely important part of the cash and investment process and financial stewardship overall. It is incumbent upon you guys to, as part of the financial reporting concept and process, that you are constantly reconciling cash. You're constantly reviewing your policies and constantly making sure that you're following those policies. The continuum of being a treasurer spans across custodianship and across financial reporting and across compliance. It's a continuous process-driven and product-driven cycle. All right, guys, we're almost home free. I promise you, we're almost done. How much insurance is enough? It's an age-old question. SMPS headquarters provides directors and officers as well as general liability insurance on behalf of each chapter. These policies cover the chapters in the event that some negligence on the part of an officer or chapter-sponsored activity in the normal course of business causes some hurt or harm to an individual or company. Again, that is an SMPS-sponsored policy. In terms of special events insurance, it may be necessary when the chapter is hosting an event that would be considered outside the normal course of business. There's a fairly long list of these types of activities that would be considered outside normal course of business that we at headquarters or our insurance brokers can provide you upon request. But typical examples are any kind of sporting event or golf tournament. Hard hat tours are pretty typical. Trips to wineries are also examples where you might require special events insurance, and those policies are not provided by headquarters. Each chapter needs to investigate and seek out those policies on an individual basis. The third and final policy that I would like to talk about is property or theft. Neither one of the above policies covers theft of property or funds by individuals. Over the years, SMPS and its chapters have not required volunteers to be bonded. Therefore, to mitigate any particular potential risk, especially if an organization may not have the strongest policies and procedures and practices in place, it's a sound business practice to investigate adding theft insurance. We have done so at the headquarters level, inquired of our brokers about potential policies for the individual chapters. We've been told that it would be easier and cheaper if each chapter inquired about property and theft insurance through SMPS headquarters. We can get generally up to $100,000 in coverage per chapter for about $250 a year. It's something I wholeheartedly encourage you guys to investigate, pursue, and take advantage of. What's new in 2016? We will be having financial reviews of select chapters. These reviews will be voluntary, air quotes. We talked about the fact that there's not uniformity or standardization, but at the SMPS headquarters level, we do have a standard, and we feel like that standard ought to be upheld and adhered to, and we're going to ask that eventually we're going to get around to each and every chapter. But for this year, we're selecting a small sample in which I will be contacting those chapters that have been chosen to review things like your policies and procedures, your bank statements, your financial reports, your board minutes, all the things you might typically find in a regular audit or review. The SMPS headquarters staff is going to do on your behalf, which leads us to the final point. The goal is not one of looking over your shoulder or playing Big Brother, but really to support you guys. It's just another service that we're adding. We want each and every chapter to be strong. We want each and every chapter to be financially solvent and succeed, and we're here to support you guys. That's all I have at this point. Natalie, do we have any questions? Natalie, are you there? Well, it appears that we don't have any questions from you guys at this point. I do thank you for participating in today's webinar. I will be reaching out
Antonio,
to every one
this
of
is
you.
Mary.
Yes. Hey, Mary.
I'm sorry. I'm great. Natalie is having some trouble with her audio, so I'm running down to, we do have some questions, so I'm going to go ahead and get those to you now.
I was a little nervous.
1 second. You know we were going to have questions on this material.
I was a little nervous.
Okay, let's start here. We've got, do we need to do the IRS 1099 and the IRS 990N, or just one?
Both. Well, both if you have individuals that qualify for 1099. 1099, again, is only for those individuals who you, contractors, not employees, individual contractors, not companies, who you paid in excess of $600 during the calendar year. So you absolutely have to file the 990, and you may or may not have 1099s that you file on an annual basis.
Okay. And how can you subscribe to QuickBooks Online when you need a credit card? For example, I'm the treasurer now, but won't be forever. So how best to handle that?
How best to handle a credit card?
It sounds like she's asking if they want to subscribe to QuickBooks. It's a matter of
transferring the credit card from one person to the other.
Right.
That if the chapter doesn't have a credit or debit card, then it may be an instance where an officer will need to pay for that service and get reimbursed on a monthly basis. But you will need a credit card. No way around that.
Okay, and let's see, we have another. Can you verify what event insurance coverage is secured by headquarters? We do or do not have coverage for golf tournaments, hard hat tours, etc. We
That's
do or
correct.
do not,
So
basically. Yeah,
we
so
do not.
go ahead.
We
Right.
do not. So any what's considered ordinary course of business is anything that suits our tax exempt purpose. We network, so any networking event, any general event that you have that isn't on that list is generally covered under our general liability coverage. If you have a event, a networking event at an establishment that serves alcohol, generally that establishment has insurance, and you would just ask that establishment to add you as an additional insured. You don't need a special event policy in most cases for hosting an event that provides alcohol. The exception is if you're actually taking a trip, like I said, to a winery. That would be considered a special event. All right, did you have anything to add about that?
No, you're correct, is that we do have, I'm sorry, hold on one second. I get a little feedback. Okay, so we, as Antonio has talked about, our general liability policy that covers a day-to-day business, even events that may have, alcohol, correct, Antonio? So it's the higher risk events like going on a ski trip, hard hat tour, golf tournament, dinner cruise, things like that where the regional or the whether it's a regional conference or a chapter event, would need to seek additional special event insurance. And the policies will range depending on the event. And so you'll need there's two different things. So there's probably a range between anywhere from $150 to $1,000 depending on the event, but I've never seen it go that high. And Antonio might be able to speak to the average cost.
Yeah, generally not more than $250.
Right, about $250 for a special event that you may be having. And then there's also certificate of insurance. So a lot of times you may have an event at a, like an art gallery, or maybe here at the Masonic Temple when we wanted to have an evening event, we had to seek out a certificate of insurance. And that's just something you can request from us or go straight to our insurance group, NOVAC, for just a certificate of insurance. So those are the two different things. But I hope that just to reiterate what you were saying there.
Yeah.
We have a couple more questions. Oh, go ahead.
Okay. No, I was just going to say, if you have any doubt at all, just reach out and give us a call, and if we don't have the answer, we'll direct you to our insurance brokers.
Okay, great. And it's also, just to remind you of the resource, we have the chapter manual that's given to all treasurers and presidents. The manual is full of all these answers all these questions related to insurance questions, financial administration. That is in the all chapter leaders community as well as in your treasurers community. So if you're looking for specific, we'll be sending that out following this webinar along with a link to this recording. Do you have a sample of a policies and procedures manual related just specifically to good policies? That's the Treasurer's Toolkit, I know, is one. Is there any other special policies or procedure, maybe a couple of page document that the chapter should be putting in place?
Answer to that question is yes. I've actually gotten samples of a few policies and procedures manuals from various chapters. I'm in the process of going through them. I do have some good ones, but once I have one that I feel like is a standard or meets the standard that we're talking about, I will make that available to everybody in my SMPS community. If anybody if that individual or any individual chapter wants it and doesn't frequent my SMPS, I encourage you to do so, first of all. But again, you can reach out directly to myself or Denise, and we'll get that policies and procedures manual out to you guys.
Okay. I have a question regarding we have a few more minutes, so I'm going to continue on, Antonio. The Heartland Regional Conference financial team met, and it was asked if we are responsible for submitting a tax form for the regional conference receipts, or if National takes care of that.
If when you say tax form, well, I guess the first question is, does the Heartland Regional have its own separate tax ID number?
Well, typically how the regionals work, and they should be working at this point, is that one of the chapters is designated as the host chapter, and their financial ID number is used. The regional conferences are not incorporated at this point and do not have their own FIN number.
Right.
Not to say we won't get there one day, but we may. But as of now, it should be a specific host chapter, and that should change for good financial practices. It shouldn't be the same chapter year after year under the same bank account. It should move. So for the Heartland Regional, if specific, let's say Columbus is hosting, they would use their chapter's FIN number to open a separate bank account under the name of the Heartland Regional. It should not be within the chapter's bank account. So you would have that separate bank account for the regional with specific signers, the treasurer who would have access to that. And then obviously when you're reporting, the Columbus chapter would need to complete a form. They would need to submit just for the income and the expenses or the revenue brought in for that specific event. It's basically just completing a form. There's no taxes paid, of course, on that, correct? And do you want to add anything else to that?
No, I would just say that if the host chapter moves around, then whichever chapter is the host chapter, when they file their 990, the regional conference for that particular year would be an event, considered an event under the host chapters.
Right, and we have a separate regional conference form now that we're asking the regional conferences to complete that gives us information on the financial activity as well. So we can also support you in tax time when it comes along. So no, the national headquarters does not file for the regional conferences. That does, as part of it's a separate event, and you would just complete that information under that chapter, so whoever FIN number is under.
Correct. That's part of the 990 filing.
Mm-hmm. Okay, there's a couple of QuickBooks questions, but I think what we can do is when you send the recording and a link to the guest QuickBooks account, just make sure they have some information on how to sign in and that type of information, how to subscribe to QuickBooks Online.
Yes.
And it says, how will chapters, one other question, I know we've got about 15 minutes, so you can also, excuse me, raise your hands. If anybody did not type in a question, I can unmute you if you have a question. I do see Ruth, I'm going to come to you and unmute you. One moment. If your question might have been answered, but I'm going to unmute you now, Ruth. Go ahead. Okay, she's unmuted. I'm not sure if you muted your own phone, Ruth, but I have unmuted you to share if you would like to ask your question. Okay, she's saying she doesn't have a mic on her computer. It's turned off. So we're going to go ahead. Any other hands raised, certainly hit your icon, and we'll be happy to unmute you to ask any questions. And I'm going to read a few more that we've received via the question box. One moment. How will chapters be chosen for the financial review?
Randomly.
So I think it will be random, but we will try to hit each demographic, that being small, medium, large, extra large.
That is correct. One of the things that we're doing with the financial reports that you guys are submitting is, number one, taking a look to see if you guys have a budget. Number two, if you've had an audit or review recently. Number three, we're looking at your reserves to see if they're adequate. And we think an adequate reserve is 6 months worth of annual expenses. Those are three of the criteria that we use. Again, I stress that we want to hit every chapter before it's all said and done. but there are certain items on your financial report that you submit to us that you've already submitted that stuck out, and we'll use as criteria for choosing our first set of test tube babies.
Okay, and we have Katie Kless. She's typed a few questions, but I'm going to go ahead and unmute you, Katie, in case you had an additional question. Go ahead.
Hi, we're wondering if we can put an additional fee on our event registration that would cover the exact percentage of credit card fees.
You can do whatever you like. I wouldn't say this is covering our credit card costs or segregate it as an additional fee. I think you price all of your events if that's a concern or an issue so that you're doing exactly that. You're covering the cost of credit card fees.
And that's normally what we've been doing, but I'm hearing that there is a trend. I haven't witnessed it personally, but my husband's employer has started doing this where they've tacked on, and they call it their credit card fee, and they put that above the amount of the purchase price. So that is starting to become a trend, and I really haven't heard much about that yet.
I have not heard much about it or seen it, maybe because I'm in the not-for-profit realm, but I know personally if I saw a credit card fee, it would probably rub me the wrong way.
Yeah, that's kind of my thought too. I encourage my husband to just put it up your fees a little bit to make sure you're covering that, and he said they weren't allowed to do that, so they had to separate it out. But I think as far as we're concerned, it should probably just stay the way we're doing it, correct?
Correct. I think when you go into pricing any product or service or event that you're doing, I think your overhead costs should be a factor in your pricing,
okay,
so that you cover overhead.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you, Katie. We have another question. One moment. I'm going to unmute Brooke Winger from Central PA. Go ahead, Brooke. Brooke? Okay, it sounds like her microphone, yeah, you have to be able to put in your PIN for your microphone. Sorry about that, I see, but go ahead and type in your question, Brooke, and I'll make sure to get that answered for you. Any other hands raised? Antonio, another question. Are you recommending that audits be done annually?
Well, if you take a look at the toolkit that we provided you, we don't necessarily, all chapters don't necessarily have audits on an annual basis. We think some form of review / audit should be done on an annual basis. So if that's an internal audit, like the one that I'm describing that we're going to do for you guys, that's adequate in some years, but we encourage you to get an independent, official, independent audit on a regular basis. I guess we're in talks, Chris, about what that regular basis is. I would like to see annual. There's a cost associated with that that could be prohibitive to some of the chapters, and I understand that. But certainly every couple of 3 years.
Yeah, I agree, Antonio. I think, if you look at the toolkit, one of the chapters that we started with as an example of the audit, they don't have an outside CPA look at it every year as an official audit, but they have an audit committee, if you will, in place that's outside of the board that looks at the books and can ask questions, of what what was spent and why, just as a back check to make sure that things are in place. So like Antonio said, maybe not an official audit from a CPA or a firm like that every year, but certainly some kind of outside of the board review every year, I think, would be encouraged.
And you don't have to seek out a big audit firm. There are many qualified accountants / CPAs that would do it for a nonprofit for, I wouldn't describe it as a nominal fee, but certainly something less than what you would have charged by a firm, as it were, to do your audits. But yes, I encourage you to do it annually if financially feasible.
And the regionals as well?
Absolutely, especially the regionals.
Right. Okay. We have an outside accountant review our books every 6 months and prepare our 990. Does that suffice for an audit?
It certainly suffices for a review. It's always good, number one, if you're using a consultant to do your books, to not use the same consultant for 10 consecutive years, but to change it up. But still, that's not well, yes, that is adequate if you're doing it on an annual basis. Every 6 months is great. As long as it's an outside auditor, it is adequate, but I would suggest that you change auditors every 3 to 5 years.
And she said accountant, so it's an accountant reviewing their books every 6 months, and they're helping them with their 990. So just does that suffice for an audit, quote unquote?
That absolutely suffices as
okay.
a review. If the accountant is not a CPA, then you don't have that that added level of assurance, and they're not able to give you an opinion per se, as you would get in the official CPA audit.
Okay. And Antonio, I just want, you may have hit on this, but I just want to reiterate to the treasurers about during regular board meetings, making sure that the treasurer is sharing an updated balance sheet or summary of activity with their board that's gone out before the board meeting. So if there are questions, that can be answered, and everything is transparent to the board members. So just making sure that practice, I'm sure you spoke to that, but just if you want to touch on it one more time, I know that question came up as well.
Yep, absolutely. As part of your face-to-face board meetings, or however you guys are doing board meetings, I would say absolutely on a quarterly basis, the treasurer needs to provide an income statement or a statement of activity, is what it's technically called for nonprofits, and a balance sheet or a statement of financial position to the board, because as I did state and reiterate a couple of times during our presentation, the entire board is considered financial stewards of the chapter, and the chapter's finances, all of them, belong not to the board, but to your members. So an accurate and timely accounting and reporting of your activity on a monthly basis is preferred, but based on the size of the chapter, quarterly basis may also be adequate, minimum quarterly basis.
And, I think the minimum, to emphasize that on quarterly, I think it's really helpful for the chapters to share on a monthly basis during their board meetings. It doesn't have to be an in-depth review, but they should be sharing an updated spreadsheet or income balance sheet at every meeting. Just being able to send that out. Most of our boards, our chapter boards, are conducting I should say, they conduct their board meetings in a consent agenda way, which is what our board of directors does. So ahead of a board meeting, you should be sending out all of those documents that should be reviewed, and you don't have to go through them all during the board meeting. You don't have to sit and go through each line item or each item on the agenda. You just need to make sure that the board members have seen it, they consent that they've seen it, and there are no questions during the actual board meeting. So I think it's a best practice to really make sure you're sending that out, that review, for your board on a monthly basis, and that if there are questions, you can certainly, board members have an opportunity to dive a little bit deeper into and ask a question, and that's how we conduct our own board meetings. So food for thought on that, but if you do want on a quarterly basis to do a much deeper dive and allow for time once a quarter to really go through the budget in much more detail, then that may be something you do, but monthly it should be reviewed. Okay, so I see we're coming up on 3 o'clock, Antonio, and I just want to remind everybody that this session has been recorded. We will provide in the Treasurer's community as well as the All Chapter Leaders community. We will also email it out to the Treasurers and Presidents. The link to this recording, your section of the manual on finance and administration and insurance, the Treasurer's Toolkit, and anything else? We need the sample. I think a few had asked about the sample spreadsheet that you had up. Could we also email that out?
Yes, we can do that. That spreadsheet also already exists on the Treasurer's community of my SMPS as well.
So it's there already, so that's great.
It's already there, but we can email it to you guys if that's the preferred method.
Well, we can do both. So we'll send it out following this, and all those documents will always be housed in that community for treasurers, so you have access to it, and then also the All Chapter Leaders community, because I know presidents and PEs would also like access to this information. So thank you, Antonio and Chris, and all of the great questions that everyone asked. We appreciate your participation. This is such a vital and important topic for not just treasurers, but for the entire chapter. We are here for you. Antonio, the staff, myself, Mary, and Natalie, Chris Rickman is a resource for you. Please reach out to us. Any questions that you have, any concerns or challenges, we are here for you. So thank you. Unless you have anything else to add, Antonio?
No, I just want to say keep the questions coming. I've already gotten several emails from you guys continuing to ask questions. Again, just to reiterate what Mary said, we are here for you guys, and we are here to serve you. So please don't hesitate to contact us via email or phone call.
Great. Thank you, Antonio. We're going to go ahead and end the webinar for today. Everyone have a great day. Thank you.
Bye-bye.